A retired Navy SEAL thought the war had taken everything he had left to give. Then a woman he had never met left him an old bakery at the edge of a northern forest. His loyal German Shepherd K9, Rune, sensed something hidden before Eli even touched the door. Beneath the dust, the broken shelves, and the cold brick oven waited a secret from his childhood. A secret that proved someone had seen him when he believed the whole world had forgotten him. But when powerful men came to take the bakery, Eli had to choose between money and a promise. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to Veteran and Dog. Elias Eli Voss drove north beneath a pale Maine morning, with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the old military watch on his left wrist. The truck was old, the kind that rattled when the road turned rough and complained whenever the wind pushed too hard against its doors. Eli liked it for that reason. It was honest. It did not pretend to be new, polished, or unbroken. Beside him sat Rune, his 7-year-old German Shepherd K9, black and tan, lean and muscular from years of disciplined work. Rune's coat was short, thick, and healthy, with a clear black saddle across his back and warm tan along his chest and legs. A faint silvering touched his muzzle, the only visible proof that he had survived more than most dogs ever would. Around his neck was an old black leather collar, worn at the edges, with a small metal tag engraved with one word, Rune. Rune did not sleep during the drive. He watched the world through the windshield with deep amber eyes, alert and measuring, as if every bend in the road might carry a scent worth remembering. Eli understood that look. It had kept them alive before. He was 43 years old, a former Navy SEAL, tall at 1.85 meters, broad-shouldered, and built with the hard, practical strength of a man trained to move through danger without wasting motion. His face was angular, his jaw cleanly cut, his cheekbones sharp beneath tan skin. A light stubble beard shaded his jaw. His deep blue-gray eyes carried the quiet distance of a man who had seen too much and learned not to speak of it unless necessary. His short dark brown hair was cut in a military style, neat and practical, with early silver at the temples. He wore the same kind of clothes he always trusted, an olive green field jacket, a red and dark blue plaid shirt underneath, dark blue cargo pants, worn brown leather boots, and the old military watch that had survived sand, rain, blood, and more prayers than Eli cared to count. The road slipped deeper into northern Maine, where sunlight fell in bright, broken pieces through tall pines. Small lakes flashed silver between the trees. Moss-covered stones lined the shoulder like old sleeping animals. The forest did not feel dark. It felt watchful, ancient, alive. A beautiful place, Eli thought. Then the thought passed through him like cold wind through an empty house. Beautiful places had never known what to do with him. 3 days earlier, a lawyer named Thomas Weller had found him at a roadside motel outside Bangor. Weller was a narrow man in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair, careful hands, and the nervous posture of someone who preferred paperwork to emotion. He wore a dark wool coat too formal for the motel lobby and carried a leather folder pressed against his chest like a shield. "Mr. Voss," he had said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to disturb you. My name is Thomas Weller. I handled the legal affairs of a woman named Mabel Whitcomb." Eli had not recognized the name. Weller explained that Mabel Whitcomb had owned a small bakery in Maple Hollow for more than 40 years. She had passed away nearly 10 months earlier. In her final will, she left the bakery, the apartment above it, and the narrow strip of land behind it to Elias Voss. Eli had stared at him for a long moment. "You've got the wrong man." "I checked 3 times, Weller had replied. She was very specific. Then he handed Eli an envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Don't sell the bakery. Stay for 90 days and you'll understand why I chose you." No explanation, no memory, no photograph. Just a dead woman's request, written as if she had known he would run. The legal terms were stranger still. Eli had to remain connected to the property for 90 days before he gained full control. If he walked away before then, the bakery would pass to a community trust. But Weller had warned him that the building carried unpaid taxes, repair costs, and an expired commercial permit. Without someone managing it, the property would likely be auctioned. That part, at least, Eli understood. Everything had a price, even promises. Now the truck rolled past a wooden sign half hidden by pine branches. "Welcome to Maple Hollow, population 1042, Rune lifted his head. Eli noticed. "What is it?" he murmured. Rune's ears angled forward. His nose twitched once, then again. He did not bark. He simply became still. That was Rune's way. Not dramatic, not uncertain. When he sensed something important, he did not waste energy announcing it to the world. Eli slowed the truck. Maple Hollow appeared gradually, not like a town built for tourists, but like a place grown from patience. A white church stood near a small green square. A hardware store displayed snow shovels and seed packets in the same front window. A diner with red booths sat beside a post office no bigger than a chapel. People moved slowly, waving from porches and sidewalks as if time had not yet taught them to hurry. At the far end of Main Street, the road narrowed and curved toward the forest. There, where the town gave way to pine and lake light, stood Whitcomb Hearth Bakery. Eli pulled to the curb and shut off the engine. For a moment, neither man nor dog moved. The bakery was a narrow brick and timber building with a sloped roof, faded trim, and ivy climbing one side like green handwriting. The sign above the door had once been painted cream and red, but years of rain and snow had worn it nearly silver. Whitcomb Hearth Bakery, several letters were cracked. One front window carried a thin fracture in the corner. Behind the building, sunlight poured through tall pines, and beyond them Eli could see the faint shimmer of water. It was not grand, it was not impressive, but it did not feel dead. That bothered him more than if it had. Rune jumped down before Eli could reach for the leash. The dog landed lightly, muscles controlled, head low, nose working. He walked straight to the bakery door and stopped. Eli stepped out, boots crunching on old gravel. Rune. The dog did not look back. He stood with his nose inches from the bottom of the door, breathing in short, focused pulls. Then he made a sound Eli had heard only a handful of times in all their years together. A low, quiet whine. Not fear. Recognition. Eli felt something tighten beneath his ribs. "Don't start getting mystical on me," he said. Rune flicked one ear, unimpressed. Eli walked to the door. The key from Weller's envelope felt small in his palm, almost foolishly small for something that had dragged him 200 miles north. He slid it into the lock. The old mechanism resisted, then turned. The door opened. A brass bell above it rang once. The sound was soft, clear, and strangely intimate. It moved through the empty shop like a voice that had waited a long time to speak. Dust floated in the morning light. The display cases were empty, their glass dulled by neglect. Chairs rested upside down on tables. Shelves lined the walls, some holding jars, others holding nothing but shadows. An old calendar still hung behind the counter, frozen nearly a year in the past. And beneath everything was a scent Eli had not expected. Flour, dry wood, vanilla, cinnamon, faint smoke, and something warm he could not name. He stepped inside. The floor creaked under his boots. Rune entered behind him, slow and careful, not exploring like a pet in a new room but searching like a working dog in a place that mattered. He moved past the tables, past the counter, toward the kitchen. At the back of the shop stood the old brick oven. It filled one wall, dark and heavy, its iron door closed like the mouth of some sleeping giant. Eli almost smiled at the thought. A bakery oven should have felt harmless. This one looked as though it had judged men and found most of them underbaked. "You and me both," Eli muttered. He walked behind the counter. The wood was worn smooth by decades of hands. Customers leaning, Mabel working, children reaching up for cookies, lonely people pretending they had only come for bread. Eli frowned. He did not know where the thought had come from. He had no memory of Mabel Whitcomb. None. No face, no voice, no kind old woman from childhood. At St. Bartholomew's home, adults came and went. Volunteers, donors, church ladies with casseroles, couples who wanted younger children, social workers who always smelled of coffee and rain. No one stayed in Eli's memory unless they had taken something from him or taught him how not to break. And yet this place carried a pressure in the air, gentle but firm, like a hand on his shoulder. He looked around and tried to imagine selling it. It should have been easy. Stay 90 days, sign papers, take whatever money came, leave Maple Hollow before anyone learned the shape of his ghosts. That had been the plan. Then Rune scratched the floor. Eli turned. The dog stood near the inner side of the counter, head lowered, one paw scraping lightly at the wooden base. Scratch, pause, scratch. His ears were forward, eyes intent. "Leave it," Eli said. Rune stopped for half a second, then he scratched again. A thin line of dust shifted near the floorboards. Eli sighed and crouched beside him. "You find a mouse, you're handling it. I'm retired." Rune did not move. Eli brushed away flour-gray dust with the edge of his sleeve. Beneath it, near the bottom of the counter, he saw a long scratch in the wood. Not random, not from age. It ran straight along a narrow seam almost hidden by grime. His humor faded. He ran his fingers over it. There was something there. A groove, a panel, maybe, old and carefully fitted, but no handle, no obvious way to open it. Rune lowered himself onto the floor beside the counter, front paws stretched forward, body still. He placed his chin near the seam as if guarding it. Eli stared at him. For years, Rune had detected wires buried under sand, men hiding beyond walls, fear beneath a calm voice, danger beneath ordinary silence. Eli had learned to trust that dog before he trusted most human beings. Now Rune had found something under a bakery counter, in a town Eli had never planned to visit. Outside, sunlight poured over the forest. Somewhere beyond the shop, a crow called once from the pines. The bakery remained quiet, but the silence had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt as though something inside the walls had just opened one eye. Eli stood slowly. He looked at the old oven, the dusty shelves, the empty display cases, the cracked front window, and finally at Rune lying guard beside the hidden seam. A smart man would have walked out. A tired man would have sold the place. But Eli Voss had once been a boy who waited by orphanage windows for someone who never came. And for reasons he did not yet understand, this forgotten bakery had begun to feel less like an inheritance and more like a question aimed directly at the locked room inside his chest. He pulled an old chair from a table, turned it upright, and sat behind the counter. Rune did not leave the seam. The day faded slowly over Maple Hollow. Gold lights slid across the floorboards. Shadows stretched from the pines outside. The bakery cooled as evening settled, but Eli stayed. He did not open the hidden panel, not yet. He only watched Rune keep guard through the first long night, faithful and silent, as if the dog knew that whatever slept beneath that counter had been waiting not for a baker, not for a soldier, but for the one wounded man who still needed to learn why he had been chosen. Eli woke before sunrise to a sound he did not recognize. For one sharp second, his hand moved toward the space beside the bed where a weapon used to be. His body had learned that before his mind could stop it. Then the room settled around him, quiet and gray-blue in the early main light, and he heard it again. A woodpecker. Not gunfire, not a distant engine, not a door slamming in a motel hallway. Just a woodpecker tapping somewhere beyond the window, steady as a small carpenter working for God. Eli let out a slow breath. The apartment above Whitcomb Hearth Bakery smelled of old pine, dust, and cold linen. It was small but not cruel. A narrow bed stood against one wall. A round table leaned slightly near the kitchen window. There was a chipped white sink, a green armchair with one sagging arm, and a bookshelf that held more empty space than books. Morning light came through thin curtains and laid pale gold across the floorboards. Rune slept near the bed, though slept was never quite the right word for him. The 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 lay with his black and tan body curled neatly, ears relaxed but never fully off duty. His old black leather collar rested against the thick fur at his neck, the metal tag engraved Rune catching a faint glimmer of dawn. When Eli moved, Rune opened one amber eye. "Morning," Eli muttered. Rune blinked once, as if judging whether morning deserved the title. Eli almost smiled. For months his mornings had belonged to places that never wanted him to stay. Cheap motels, roadside diners, rented cabins with thin walls and colder coffee. This was different. The building creaked below him like an old ship at dock. Pipes groaned in the walls. The forest breathed beyond the window. Nothing hurried. That should have comforted him. Instead, it made him uneasy. Stillness had a way of asking questions. He dressed in the clothes that made sense to him. The olive green field jacket, the red and dark blue plaid shirt, dark blue cargo pants, worn brown leather boots, the old military watch. Practical things, honest things. Armor for a man no longer officially at war. Downstairs, the bakery waited in dim light. Eli unlocked the front door from the inside and pushed it open to let in the morning air. Cold pine drifted through the room, stirring dust from the display cases. Outside, Maple Hollow was slowly waking. Somewhere down Main Street, a truck backed up with 3 soft beeps. A woman in a blue coat walked a terrier past the post office. Smoke lifted from chimneys in clean white ribbons. Inside, the work looked worse than it had the night before. Dust filmed every shelf. One cabinet smelled faintly of old flour and damp wood. The chairs were heavier than they looked. A stack of baking trays had rusted together as if they had taken a vow never to be useful again. Eli stood in the middle of the room with a broom in one hand and a trash bag in the other. "You ever clear a building full of expired yeast?" he asked Rune. Rune sat at the front window, disciplined and watchful. "Right, me neither." The first hour was a quiet battle. Eli dragged broken boxes from beneath the counter. He wiped old jars until their labels appeared like ghosts. He found a dozen paper bags folded carefully in a drawer, each one stamped with the bakery name in faded red ink. He set them aside for no reason he could explain. By mid-morning, his back ached. His hands were gray with dust. A streak of flour had somehow crossed his jaw, making him look less like a retired Navy SEAL and more like a man losing a fight to breakfast. That was when someone knocked on the open doorframe. Eli turned. An elderly man stood there with a toolbox in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other. He was tall and thin, with slightly stooped shoulders, strong carpenter's hands, and a sun-weathered face full of creases that looked carved rather than aged. A sparse silver mustache sat beneath a crooked nose. His gray hair was mostly hidden under an old baseball cap stained at the brim. He wore a thick brown-red flannel jacket over a gray thermal shirt, faded jeans, brown work boots, and an old leather tool belt that looked nearly as stubborn as he did. The man looked Eli up and down. "You the soldier?" Eli held the broom like it might become evidence. "Depends who's asking." The old man's mouth twitched. "Jonah Pike. I made that sign above your door 41 years ago." Eli glanced outside at the faded sign. Jonah followed his eyes. Don't blame me for the paint. Paint ages worse than men, and men already do a poor job of it. Rune rose from his place by the window, not threatening, just attentive. Jonah looked at the dog and gave a respectful nod. That one military? Retired K9, Eli said. Name's Rune. Looks like he still outranks both of us. He thinks so. Jonah stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, though somehow it did not feel rude. He crossed to the front door, opened and closed it twice, then made a face. Doors dragging. I noticed. You going to fix it? I was going to add it to the list. How long's the list? Eli looked around the bakery. Biblical, Jonah grunted. Then we'll start with Genesis. He set down his coffee, opened the toolbox, and went to work on the hinges. Eli watched him for a moment, unsure what to do with help that had not been requested. People who gave without asking tended to want something later. That was one of the first things life had taught him. How much? Eli asked. Jonah did not look up. How much what? How much to fix it? The old man paused, offended in the quiet way of older men who had earned the right to be. Mabel brought soup to my wife every Wednesday for 2 winters after the cancer came back. Baked soft rolls because Ruth couldn't chew much toward the end. His voice roughened, then recovered behind a dry little snort. Mabel charged me exactly nothing, which was rude, because I had planned to complain about the price. Eli said nothing. Jonah tightened a screw with slow precision. So no, Mr. Voss, you don't owe me. I'm paying an old bill to a woman who refused to collect. For the first time since arriving, Eli felt the bakery grow less empty. Jonah worked for almost an hour. He spoke in short bursts, never too sentimental, as if emotion was something that needed to be handled with gloves. He told Eli that Mabel opened before dawn even in snowstorms, that she remembered birthdays better than the church secretary, that she once burned an entire batch of pies and blamed the devil, the oven, and possibly Canada. At that, Eli actually laughed. It surprised him enough that he looked down. Jonah heard it and smiled without making a show of winning. When the door finally swung smooth and clean, Jonah stepped back like a man presenting a cathedral. There, he said. Now it opens like it wants people to come in. A strange sentence, Eli thought. Stranger still was how much it seemed to matter. Jonah gathered his tools, but before he left, he glanced toward the counter, then at Rune. The dog had returned to his watchful place near the window, but his head was turned slightly, eyes fixed somewhere behind Eli. Jonah's expression changed for half a second. What? Eli asked. The old carpenter shook his head. Nothing. Just, Mabel used to say a good dog hears the truth before people do. Eli frowned. She had a dog? No. Jonah put on his cap. That's the funny part. He walked out before Eli could ask more. The little brass bell above the door trembled after him, though the door had already closed. A soft ring moved through the bakery, delicate and brief. Rune did not bark. He only stared at the bell as if listening to someone Eli could not hear. For a moment the shop felt touched by a hand from the past. Not haunted, not dark, just remembered. Then the bell went still, and the silence afterward felt heavier than before. By afternoon, Eli had cleared 3 cabinets and filled 4 trash bags. He had found cracked mugs, brittle string, old receipts, a mouse nest, 2 bent spoons, and enough expired baking powder to disappoint an army. He was dragging a broken crate from the pantry when a woman's voice came from the doorway. You Elias Voss? Eli turned. The woman standing there wore a dark brown deputy jacket over a tan uniform shirt, black tactical pants, a duty belt, and practical black boots dusted with road salt. She was about 38, around 5'7", with a strong, agile build and a sharp face made sharper by the way she studied everything before trusting it. Her fair skin was reddened slightly by northern weather. Chestnut brown hair was tied in a low ponytail, though a few loose strands had escaped near her temples after what looked like a long shift. Her eyes were serious but not cold. That made Eli more cautious, not less. I am, he said. Deputy Mara Keene. She stepped inside, gaze moving from Eli to Rune, then across the bakery. When she looked at the old oven, her expression softened for the briefest instant. Rune stood. He did not growl. He simply watched her with calm attention. Mara noticed. He bite? Only bad questions. Jonah would have appreciated that, Eli thought. Mara's mouth almost moved into a smile. Almost. I'm here unofficially, she said. For now, that usually means officially later. It can. Eli leaned the broom against the counter. What do you want? Deputy. Mara looked at the dusty shelves, the empty display cases, the sign outside the window. Mabel Whitcomb mattered to this town, she said. More than you know. I'm starting to get that impression. Then you should also know people are worried. About me? About what you'll do. There it was, the suspicion. Clean and polished as a badge. Eli felt his jaw tighten. I inherited a bakery I didn't ask for from a woman I never met. I've been here less than 24 hours. Seems early for a trial. Mara did not flinch. Crescent Ridge Development has been buying land around Birchwater for 8 months. They've got the old mill lot, the west shoreline, half the cabins beyond the cove. This building and the strip of land behind it are the last piece they need for their resort plan. Eli looked toward the rear wall, beyond which stood pines, cold light, and the faint shimmer of lake water. What happens if they get it? Private cabins, spa lodge, gated access to the lake. Mara's voice stayed even, but something fierce lived under it. No public trail, no old dock, no bakery. I haven't spoken to any developers. You will. Mara's eyes returned to his. They'll offer more money than this place looks worth. They'll mention back taxes, repairs, permits. They'll make selling sound like mercy. Eli gave a humorless breath. Maybe it is. Mara's expression hardened. For a second they stood on opposite sides of the same invisible line. Then she looked at Rune and her voice shifted a little. That dog served with you? Yes. He looks like he's lost people. Eli did not answer. Mara nodded once, as if that was answer enough. So have we. She turned toward the door. Mabel didn't leave this place to just anyone, Mara said without looking back. I hope she was right about you. Then she left. Eli stood in the quiet, angry in a way that had nowhere to go. He had spent half his life being ordered into impossible places. Now, a dead woman, a suspicious deputy, and an entire town seemed to be aiming expectations at him like searchlights. He did not owe them anything. He repeated that silently as he returned to the cabinets. He did not owe Maple Hollow. He did not owe Mabel Whitcomb. He did not owe an old bakery with bad hinges and dusty shelves and a legal mess waiting somewhere in a folder. 90 days. Sell, leave. It was a good plan. Then he opened the narrow drawer beside the old register. Inside were slips of paper, not receipts, not recipes, notes. Each was written in careful, slanted handwriting. Save soft bread for Henry. His teeth are weak, but his pride is not. Do not ask Winona if she needs help. She will say no. Leave the loaf on the back step before sunrise. Extra cinnamon for the children from St. Bartholomew's. They pretend not to care, but they always smile. Eli stopped breathing. St. Bartholomew's. The name reached through him with cold fingers. He was 9 again for a heartbeat, standing in a line that smelled of wool coats and boiled carrots, watching adults smile too brightly, learning not to hope too loudly because hope, when it failed, made a sound no one else seemed to hear. He lowered himself onto the stool behind the counter. Rune came to him immediately, pressing his shoulder against Eli's leg. The dog did not whine. He did not demand. He simply became warm, solid weight. Eli stared at the little note. The children from St. Bartholomew's. Not orphans, not poor kids, not charity. Children. Somewhere in the back of his mind, something old shifted. He placed the notes carefully on the counter and returned to the drawer. Beneath a stained cloth tucked against the back corner, he found a narrow strip of wood that did not match the rest of the drawer frame. It was cleaner, newer, as if fingers had touched it more often than the surrounding boards. Eli brushed away a crust of old flour. A tiny brass-lined keyhole looked back at him. He did not move. The key from Thomas Weller's envelope was upstairs in his jacket pocket. Rune stood beside him, amber eyes fixed on the drawer, body still as a carved statue. Eli had faced doors with explosives behind them, rooms where men waited with rifles, alleys where one wrong breath could decide who went home. But this little keyhole, hidden inside an abandoned bakery in a bright northern town, made his pulse slow in a way danger never had. Because danger was simple, this felt personal. Eli closed the drawer without opening anything. Not yet. The day outside faded toward evening. The pines behind the bakery glowed green-black against a gold sky. The little brass bell above the door hung silent now, but Eli could still feel its earlier ring somewhere in his chest. He looked down at Rune. What did she leave us, boy? Rune did not answer. He only stayed beside him, loyal and watchful, as the old bakery held its breath. Eli did not open the hidden lock right away. For several minutes he stood behind the counter with the little brass key resting in his palm, watching the last color of evening fade from the windows of Whitcomb Hearth Bakery. Outside, the pines behind the building had turned almost black against the blue edge of twilight. Inside, the old shop held its breath. Rune sat beside him, silent and steady. The 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 did not paw at the drawer now. He did not whine. He simply watched Eli with those deep amber eyes, as if he understood that some doors did not open because a lock was ready. They opened because a man was. Eli turned the key. The sound was small. Click. No explosion, no warning, no rush of danger from the other side. Only the soft release of something old deciding it had waited long enough. The drawer did not slide open at first. Eli had to work it carefully, easing the swollen wood forward inch by inch. Dust loosened along the seams. A smell rose from inside. Dry paper, old leather, faint wax, and the ghost of cinnamon. Beneath the drawer was a narrow wooden compartment, deeper than it should have been. Whoever built it had done the work with care. Not a hiding place for money. not a careless hole carved by fear. This had been made to protect something. Inside lay 4 objects: a leather-bound book, a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, a brass pocket watch darkened with age, its chain coiled neatly beside it, and a small wooden box no bigger than a loaf of bread. Eli reached for the book first. The leather cover was worn smooth at the corners, the way things become when human hands return to them over and over again. On the front, pressed into the leather in faded gold letters, were 3 words. The Hearth Ledger. Eli gave a quiet, humorless breath. A ledger, he murmured, finally. Something normal. Rune's ears shifted. Eli opened the cover. It was not normal. The first page held no columns, no numbers, no payments due, no records of bread sold or flour bought. Instead, the handwriting was careful and slanted, graceful without being decorative. Henry Locke, January 12, 1989. Eleanor buried today. Apple pie every Saturday morning. Leave before he sees me. No charge. Eli stared at the line. He turned the page. Veteran in blue truck near Birchwater Dock. February 3, 1991. Couldn't stop shaking. Coffee 2 rolls, wool blanket from storage room. Do not ask his name unless he offers it. No charge. Another page. St. Bartholomew's Home, December 18, 1993. Heating fund short again. Send money through church office. Extra cinnamon rolls for Christmas visit. No charge. The words struck Eli harder than he expected. St. Bartholomew's. He read the line again, then again, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into some other place, some other childhood, some other boy. They did not. The bakery dimmed around him. For a moment, he was no longer a 43-year-old former Navy SEAL standing behind an abandoned counter. He was 9 years old again, sitting on a narrow bed with a gray blanket tucked under his chin, listening to wind scrape ice against the windows of St. Bartholomew's Home. The orphanage had always smelled of boiled vegetables, floor polish, and old wool. The radiators clanged like tired ghosts. In winter, the younger children cried at night because the cold found every crack. Eli had learned not to cry. Crying made people look at you with pity, and pity was a warm thing that vanished too quickly. He remembered Christmas visits. Adults arrived with boxes and bright voices. They smelled like church perfume and outside air. They called the children sweetheart, buddy, angel. Then they left with empty boxes and full hearts, and the children stayed behind. Rune pressed his muzzle against Eli's knee. Not hard, not demanding, just enough. Eli lowered his hand and rested it briefly on the dog's head. Rune's fur was warm beneath his palm, solid and real, pulling him back from the cold rooms of memory. I'm here, Eli whispered, though he was not sure whether he was speaking to Rune or to the boy he used to be. He kept reading. Page after page carried names. Some he did not know. Some were only descriptions. Widow with red scarf. Boy who sweeps sidewalk after school. Woman from Mill Road too proud to ask. Old fisherman with bad lungs. Deputy's father out of work again. Little girl from St. Bartholomew's who hides food in her coat sleeve. Every entry ended the same way. No charge. Eli had seen ledgers before. In war, men kept lists of supplies, casualties, coordinates, names of the living and the dead. Those records told a person what had been lost, what had been spent, what could be counted. Mabel Whitcomb's ledger counted something else. Need. Loneliness. The exact places where pride prevented people from saying, help me. Eli untied the faded blue ribbon around the letters. The first envelope had softened with age. The writing across the front trembled slightly, as if the hand that wrote it had belonged to someone elderly or afraid. Eli unfolded the paper with surprising care. Dear Miss Whitcomb, you never knew this, but the bread you left on our porch every Tuesday kept my children fed after my husband passed. I tried to thank you. You kept saying someone had paid ahead. I never found out who. Now I think maybe you meant all of us. Eli swallowed. The next letter came from a man named Aaron Bell, who wrote that as a child he used to sweep Mabel's sidewalk every Saturday. She always gave him 2 rolls and told him work deserved dignity, even when the world called it charity. He now owned a construction business and repaired roofs for elderly neighbors when they could not pay. A third letter was shorter. Mabel, I was the veteran in the blue truck. You never asked what I saw overseas. Thank you for that. You just handed me coffee and sat on the curb until my hand stopped shaking. I lived because you did not make me explain why I was dying inside. Eli closed his eyes. He knew that kind of silence, the kind that did not interrogate pain, the kind that sat beside it until pain stopped believing it was alone. Rune suddenly lifted his head. His body changed first, shoulders firm, ears forward, nose tilted toward the wooden box still resting inside the compartment. Eli looked at him. What? Rune stepped closer to the box, sniffed once, then backed away and sat, not afraid, respectful. That was the only word Eli could put to it. A chill moved through him despite the warm room. He opened the box. Inside was a photograph. The edges had curled with time. The colors had faded into soft browns and golds. It showed Mabel Whitcomb standing outside a stone building Eli recognized before his mind was ready to name it. St. Bartholomew's Home. Mabel was younger in the photograph, perhaps in her mid-40s. She was a small framed woman with warm brown eyes, white beginning to thread through her hair, and a smile that did not ask anyone to perform happiness for her. She wore a plain navy dress, a cream cardigan, and a white apron dusted with flour. Her hands were folded in front of her, thin but strong, the hands of a woman who had carried Trey's secrets and other people's grief for years. Children stood around her holding cinnamon rolls wrapped in brown paper. At the edge of the photograph was a boy, thin, dark-haired, guarded. He stood slightly apart from the others, shoulders lifted as if ready to defend himself from disappointment. In his hands was a cinnamon roll, broken into 2 uneven pieces. He was giving the larger half to a smaller boy whose face was still wet from crying. Eli knew the boy before he accepted it. Himself, the room seemed to tilt. He remembered the smaller boy now, Ben, 6 years old, always losing things, always apologizing when other children took them. Eli remembered breaking the roll and pretending he was not hungry. He had not remembered anyone watching. Rune moved closer and pressed his shoulder against Eli's leg. Eli turned the photograph over. On the back, in Mabel's careful handwriting, were the words, "A kind child does not need to be fixed. He only needs to be protected." Eli sat down hard on the stool behind the counter. His breath came slowly, unevenly. All his life, he had believed he entered the world as an unclaimed thing. A boy passed between forms and rooms and temporary kindness. Then he became a soldier because soldiers were useful. Soldiers were chosen for missions, even if no one chose them for love. But here was proof that someone had seen him before the medals, before the scars, before the war. Someone had seen the boy, not the weapon, not the survivor, the boy. For a long time, Eli did not move. The bakery around him grew darker as evening settled deeper over Maple Hollow. Outside, the forest whispered against the walls. Inside, the old ledger lay open beneath his hand. Finally, he returned to the compartment and found one more envelope tucked beneath the pocket watch. This one was sealed. Across the front, written in the same steady hand, was his name, Elias Voss. Below it, one line, "For the day the soldier stops running." Eli held the envelope for a long while. His thumb traced the edge of the seal, but he did not break it. Not because he did not want answers, because for the first time, he feared the answer might not accuse him. It might forgive him. He placed the envelope on the counter beside the photograph. Rune lowered himself to the floor beside it, laying his head near the paper, as though guarding a wound that had not yet agreed to close. Eli turned off the front lights, leaving only one small lamp glowing near the register. The bakery did not feel empty now. It felt full of names, full of hunger that had been noticed, full of grief that had been fed, full of a woman Eli had never met, who had somehow reached across 34 years and placed a warm hand on the shoulder of the boy he thought the world had forgotten. All night, Rune stayed beside the sealed envelope, and Eli, sitting in the quiet behind the counter, did not run. By morning, Eli understood one thing with the certainty of a man standing under a loaded sky. The bakery was not going to explain itself from inside its own walls. He placed the hearth ledger in a canvas field bag, the same kind he had carried through places where maps lied and roads disappeared. Rune watched him from beside the counter, ears lifted, amber eyes following every movement. The German shepherd had stayed near the sealed envelope all night, but when Eli zipped the ledger into the bag, Rune rose as if he had been waiting for orders. "We're not running," Eli said quietly. Rune's tail moved once. Outside, Maple Hollow looked almost too peaceful for the weight Eli carried. The morning sun spilled over the town square. Frost glittered on parked cars. The white church steeple stood against a blue sky so clean it seemed newly washed. Behind the shops, the northern forest waited in tall green ranks, pine needles shining with cold light. The town library sat just off the square, a modest brick building with flower boxes beneath the windows and a carved wooden sign shaped like an open book. Inside, it smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and rain that had dried in wool coats over many winters. Behind the front desk stood Naomi Bell. She was 64, slender and calm in the way deep water was calm. Her shoulder-length salt and pepper hair was gathered loosely with a wooden hairpin. Thin glasses rested low on her nose, and her bright brown eyes seemed to notice not only what a person said, but what they carried behind the words. She wore a moss-green turtleneck, a long earth-brown skirt, a cream wool shawl, and low ankle boots. Nothing about her was hurried. Nothing about her was careless. She looked up before Eli spoke. "You must be Elias Voss." Eli stopped. "That obvious in Maple Hollow, a stranger with a retired K9 and Mabel Whitcomb's bakery keys is not exactly a secret." Rune sat beside Eli, controlled and quiet. Naomi looked at him with gentle respect, not reaching for him, not calling him sweet boy as strangers often did. "And this must be Rune," she said. Rune blinked once. Naomi smiled. A serious gentleman. He's been accused of worse, Eli said. Naomi's gaze fell to the field bag. Her expression changed, not with surprise, but with the sadness of someone seeing a letter arrive long after the person who wrote it was gone. You found the ledger. Eli's hand tightened around the strap. You knew about it? I knew Mabel kept something. Naomi came slowly around the desk. I never knew where, and I never knew who she meant to leave it to. He removed the leather-bound book and placed it on a reading table near the window. Naomi did not touch it at first. She simply looked at the cover. The Hearth Ledger, she murmured. Of course she called it that. She recorded people, Eli said. Not money, no. Naomi's voice softened. Mabel never measured wealth by what stayed in the drawer. For the next hour, Naomi led him through old newspaper archives. She moved with quiet precision, pulling boxes from shelves, unlocking a cabinet of microfilm, setting faded clippings beneath a small glass weight. Eli read headlines that barely seemed worthy of public memory. Local bakery provides meals during ice storm. Whitcomb Hearth donates bread for school fundraiser. Anonymous gift keeps winter shelter open. Children's home receives heating support before Christmas. Mabel's name was rarely in the first paragraph. Sometimes it did not appear at all. She avoided credit, Eli said. Naomi adjusted her glasses. She believed kindness lost something when people used it to build statues of themselves. Eli looked at the clipping about the children's home. St. Bartholomew's again. There was no photograph, no smiling donor holding a ceremonial check. Just a small article about a heating fund that had been paid before a winter storm arrived. Rune, who had been lying beneath the table, suddenly stood, his nose lifted. He turned away from Eli and walked toward the back corner of the library, past biographies, past local maps, past a shelf of children's books with worn cloth spines. He stopped in front of a row of archival boxes stacked beneath a narrow window. Rune, Eli called softly. The dog did not return. Naomi followed, curious now. Those are St. Bartholomew's community files. Old programs, visit logs, donation drives. Rune lowered his head and touched one box with his nose. Naomi read the label. Christmas Outreach, 1993. Eli felt the room still around him. Naomi opened the box. Inside were folded programs, receipts, old photographs, and a thin sign-up sheet for volunteers. Naomi carefully lifted one page. Halfway down, written in blue ink, was the name M. Whitcomb. Beside it, under the column marked contribution, someone had written 36. Heating fund, paid in full, name withheld at donor's request. Eli stared at the page. Rune sat at his feet, calm as a witness who had led a man exactly where he needed to stand. Naomi did not speak for a long moment. At last she said, some people leave fingerprints. Mabel left warmth. The words moved through Eli slowly. He had survived war because he trusted evidence. Tracks in dirt, broken branches, disturbed wires, the angle of a shadow. Now Rune had followed a scent or a feeling or some quiet animal certainty straight to a record from Eli's childhood. Not proof of danger, proof of mercy. And somehow that was harder to face. Later that morning, Naomi folded a slip of paper and handed it to him. Henry Locke still lives outside town, she said. If you want to understand the first page of the ledger, start with him. Henry Locke's house stood near Birchwater Lake, white paint weathered by decades of snow and sun. The porch sagged slightly in the middle. A wind chime made from old silver spoons hung by the door, chiming whenever the lake breeze moved. Henry opened after the second knock. He was in his late 80s, thin but not fragile, with a long face shaped by grief and stubborn survival. His white hair was combed neatly back. His hands trembled a little on the cane, but his blue eyes remained clear. He wore a dark green cardigan over a plaid shirt, wool trousers and slippers that looked older than some buildings in town. He looked at Eli, then at Rune. Well, Henry said, voice dry as kindling. Mabel finally sent the soldier. Eli did not know how to answer that. Naomi, who had come along but stayed respectfully near the porch rail, smiled. Henry, this is Eli Voss. I know who he is. Henry stepped aside. Come in before the cold starts charging rent. The living room smelled of applewood smoke and old books. Photographs covered the walls. A young Henry in a fishing boat. A woman with laughing eyes beside a lake. A wedding picture browned by age. In nearly every photo, the same woman appeared. Eleanor Locke. She was beautiful, Eli said before he thought better of it. Henry looked at the nearest picture. Still is. Death is rude, but it does not get to edit everything. His humor was thin, but it held. They sat near the window, Rune lying politely at Eli's feet. Henry watched the dog for a while. That animal has manners better than half the town council. He's selective, Eli said. Henry gave a small smile. Then his gaze dropped to the ledger Eli had brought. The apple pies, he said. Eli nodded. Every Saturday. Henry leaned back, the smile fading into memory. After Eleanor died, I locked that door and meant to keep it locked. People came. They knocked. They brought casseroles. I hated them for being kind where I could see it. Eli understood that more than he wanted to. The first Saturday I found an apple pie on the porch. Henry continued. No note, no name. I knew it was Mabel. I marched down to the bakery ready to scold her. What did she say? Henry's mouth twitched. She said if I didn't want pie, I could give it to the birds, but the birds had enough trouble without my mood. Despite himself, Eli laughed. Henry's eyes warmed at the sound. Second week, another pie. Third week, another. After a month, I opened the door before she could leave. I only planned to tell her to stop. Did you? No. Henry looked toward the window where the lake shone pale through the trees. I said good morning. It was the first thing I'd said to another person in 6 days. Silence settled. Then Henry spoke the words slowly, as if each one had been earned. The pie did not save me because it was good. It saved me because it forced me to open the door. Eli felt the sentence land somewhere deep and tender. He thought of his truck, the motels, the way he had kept moving so no one could learn which parts of him still shook when the night turned too quiet. He had not locked himself in a house. He had simply carried the locked door with him. On the walk back toward town, Rune began pulling gently toward the lake path. Not hard, just enough pressure to make Eli notice. The path curved beneath tall pines and opened onto a wooden bench facing Birchwater Lake. A bronze plaque was fixed to the backrest, polished by years of hands. In loving memory of Mabel Whitcomb, she taught this town that no one should ever carry life's burdens alone. Eli stood there, reading it twice. Near the tree line, a boy watched the bakery across the road. He was about 12, thin and slightly small for his age, wearing an old navy jacket too light for the cold, a gray hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers dusted with frost. His light brown hair was uneven and messy. His cheeks were red from the wind, and his brown eyes carried the guarded look of a child already practiced at expecting rejection. Rune took one gentle step toward him. The boy startled like a deer. Then he ran into the trees. Eli did not call after him. Something in the boy's shoulders told him chasing would only prove the world was still unkind. Naomi, who had stopped beside him, said softly, "That's Mason Reed. Good boy. Hard year." Eli watched the place where Mason had vanished. All at once, he remembered the photograph in the wooden box. A boy at the edge of a group, holding half a cinnamon roll, waiting to see whether warmth was real or temporary. That evening, back at the bakery, Eli sat behind the counter with the ledger open and Mabel's old notes spread before him. The building felt different now, less like a burden, more like a map. Not a gift, he thought, a mission. The word should have comforted him. Missions had structure, objectives, endpoints. But this one had no target except loneliness. Just after dusk, the front door opened. Deputy Mara Keene stepped inside, shoulders squared against the cold chestnut hair wind loosened around her face. She carried a manila folder under one arm. Her eyes moved from the ledger to Eli. "You need to see this," she said. Eli's eye stood. Mara placed the folder on the counter and opened it. Tax notices, repair assessments, a letter from the county. Another from a legal office representing Crescent Ridge Development. "They found the unpaid property taxes," Mara said, "and they're already asking questions about the building's condition." Eli looked over the papers, his jaw tightening. "How long? 90 days matters more than you think," Mara said. "If this place isn't stabilized by then, they'll pressure the county hard. Maybe an auction, maybe a forced sale through liens. They'll dress it up as procedure." Eli looked toward the dark windows. Beyond them, the pines, the lake, the bench, the place where Mason had run. For the first time since arriving in Maple Hollow, staying no longer felt like an emotional inconvenience. It felt like a fight. Rune stood beside him, silent and ready. And Eli, who had spent years trying to leave wars behind, understood that one had just found him anyway. By the next morning, Eli had a list. Not the kind of list a man liked. Not the kind with simple objectives and a clean line drawn through each completed task. This list came from Deputy Mara Keene, written in neat block letters on a yellow legal pad and delivered with the expression of a woman who had no intention of making bad news sound friendly. Expired commercial food permit. Kitchen inspection required. Refrigeration unit below standard. Roof leak above rear storage. Brick oven needs professional assessment. Gas line age unknown. Eli stood behind the counter of Whitcomb Hearth Bakery, reading it for the third time while Rune sat beside the old display case, ears lifted, eyes calm. Mara stood near the front door. Dark brown deputy jacket zipped against the cold chestnut hair tied low but wind loosened around her face. Her gaze moved over the dusty shelves, the old oven, the water stain blooming on the rear ceiling. "If you're going to keep Mabel's place open," she said, "keep it right." Eli looked up. "That your official opinion? That's my human one." Mara folded her arms. "My official opinion is that if you serve food out of a kitchen that hasn't passed inspection, I'll shut you down before the county does." "You always this encouraging?" "Only with men who inherit bakeries they don't know how to run." Rune made a soft huff through his nose. Eli glanced down at him. Don't take her side. Mara almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough to suggest the woman did own a softer expression and simply kept it locked where strangers could not borrow it. The truth was, Eli wanted to argue. He wanted to say he had handled worse things than a leaky roof and an expired permit. He had crossed hostile streets under fire. He had dragged wounded men through smoke. He had made decisions in seconds that still woke him in the dark. But none of that changed the fact that he did not know whether the refrigerator could hold milk safely. That humbled him more than he liked. By noon, Jonah Pike arrived with a ladder over one shoulder and his old leather tool belt riding low at his hip. The elderly carpenter looked at Mara's list, whistled softly and said, "Well, good news. The building hasn't collapsed yet. Always start with gratitude." "Can you fix the roof?" Eli asked. Jonah squinted toward the ceiling stain. "I can fix the part that's leaking. Whether the roof has other opinions is between it and the Lord." Then Jonah announced that Eli needed help with the baking side of the bakery before the building itself died of embarrassment. An hour later, he returned with Gus Holloway. Gus was 76 years old, short and slightly round, with a slow walk that made every step look negotiated. His sparse gray hair hid beneath an old white baker's cap, and his pale blue eyes carried the amused sparkle of a man who had seen enough human foolishness to stop being surprised by it. His nose was red from the cold. His hands trembled faintly when they hung at his sides, but when he touched the edge of the counter, they settled with surprising grace. He wore an old white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a gray wool vest, brown trousers, soft black leather shoes, and an off-white apron stained by flour from years that refused to wash away. Gus looked Eli up and down. "So," he said, "a Navy SEAL wants to make bread." Eli kept his face still, apparently. Gus nodded gravely. "God has a sense of humor, after all." Jonah laughed so hard he had to brace a hand against the doorframe. Gus walked into the kitchen as if returning to a church where he had once been young. His expression changed when he saw the brick oven. The humor softened. He placed one hand on its side, not touching it like equipment, but like an old animal. "Mabel used to say this oven was stubborn," Gus murmured. "Then she married Harold Whitcomb and apologized to the oven." "Harold was worse?" Eli asked. "Harold once argued with a mailbox because the mail was late." Even Mara laughed at that, quiet and brief. For the first time, the bakery sounded almost alive. Gus began with the simplest thing: country white bread, flour, water, yeast, salt, patience. Eli expected instructions, measurements, timing, a process. What he did not expect was Gus slapping his hand lightly with a wooden spoon. "Too rough," Gus said. "I'm mixing dough, you're interrogating it. It's flour, it's becoming bread. Show some respect." Eli looked at Jonah. Jonah raised both hands. "Don't look at me. Last thing I baked was a potato in 1987, and it came out with political opinions. The first loaf was a disaster. It emerged from the temporary countertop oven with a bottom like stone and a top pale enough to look ashamed of itself." Jonah tapped it with his knuckle. "Could use this to hold the door open." Eli took it from him. "I'll hold your door open with it. See? Useful already." The second loaf burned along one side because Eli misread the temperature. The third collapsed in the center. The fourth rose beautifully, giving Eli a dangerous moment of confidence, then tasted like regret because he forgot the salt. Rune inspected each attempt with professional seriousness. He sniffed the first loaf, sneezed, and turned his head away with such calm disappointment that Gus nearly doubled over laughing. "There," Gus said. "Your dog has taste. That's promising." Eli wanted to be irritated. Instead, he laughed. It came out rusty but real. As afternoon stretched on, flour dusted the counter, Eli's jacket sleeves, Jonah's mustache, and one of Rune's ears. The bakery no longer felt frozen in the past. It felt awkward, imperfect, and breathing. Gus taught Eli to feel the dough rather than command it, to let it rest, to wait for warmth to do what force could not. That lesson bothered Eli, not because it was difficult, but because it was true in places beyond baking. There were wounds he had ordered himself to outgrow. They had not obeyed either. Near dusk, Eli wiped his hands on a towel and moved toward the old brick oven. Jonah had checked the outer frame. Gus had cleaned the iron door. Mara had stepped outside to take a call from the county inspector. "We'll test the pilot only," Gus said. "No full firing until someone licensed looks over the line." Eli nodded. He reached toward the valve. Rune growled. It was low, controlled, and immediate. Everyone stopped. Eli turned. Rune stood several feet from the oven, body rigid, ears forward, eyes fixed on the wall behind the brickwork. "Rune," Eli said quietly. The dog did not look at him. Eli had heard that sound before in places where men learned quickly not to dismiss it. Not fear, not aggression. Warning. Jonah lowered the wrench in his hand. Gus went still. Eli took one step toward the oven. Rune moved faster. The German shepherd caught the sleeve of Eli's field jacket gently between his teeth and pulled him back. Not enough to tear fabric. just enough to stop him. Easy, Eli said. Rune released him, then placed himself between Eli and the oven door. Mara came back inside, phone still in hand. What happened? Eli did not answer right away. He was watching Rune. The dog's nose worked the air. His focus stayed on the old wall behind the oven, where brick met dry timber and shadow. Gas, Eli said. Gus's face changed. Shut everything off. It is off, Jonah said. Then open the rear door anyway. They moved quickly after that. Jonah opened the back door. Mara called the volunteer fire chief. Gus, face pale beneath his baker's cap, checked the old pipe running along the rear wall without touching the valve. Within 20 minutes, a stocky volunteer named Pete Arlen arrived in a heavy Cas fire jacket, with a shaved head, thick beard, and the calm, practical manner of a man who had smelled too many bad boilers in old buildings. He carried a handheld detector and said very little until the device began chirping near the oven line. Small leak, Pete said. Old fitting. You were smart not to fire it. Eli looked at Rune. Pete followed his gaze. Dog catch it. Dog stopped me. Pete crouched slightly, careful not to crowd Rune. Good dog. Rune accepted the praise like an officer accepting a report. Then Pete checked the wall again and frowned. Wood behind this section is too dry, he said. Heat exposure over years. You fired that oven hard with a leak nearby. You might not have lost the whole building today, but you'd have tried. Silence filled the kitchen. Eli looked at the brick oven, then at the wall, then at the dog standing steady in the flour-dusted light. Rune had not found an enemy. He had found the moment before a tragedy. Mara's eyes were on Rune now, and the suspicion Eli had seen in her since the day they met had shifted. Not vanished, Mara was too careful for that, but it had bent into something like respect. That dog just saved Mabel's bakery, she said softly. No, Eli replied, his voice low. He saved all of us from explaining to Mabel why we burned it down. Jonah cleared his throat. For the record, I would have blamed the Navy. Gus pointed at Eli, and I would have believed him. The laughter that followed was small but necessary. After Pete shut down the gas line and left instructions, the work changed. No one spoke of opening soon. Now it was about making the bakery safe enough to deserve opening at all. Jonah marked the wall for repair. Gus wrote a list of parts the oven needed. Mara promised to call the inspector and explain the emergency before Crescent Ridge could twist it into a violation. Naomi stopped by near evening with an old folder proving Mabel had once started a maintenance fund for the bakery. Small but real, tucked inside community records no developer had bothered to read. People kept showing up. Not a crowd, not a miracle, just one hand after another. And somehow that made it harder for Eli. Kindness from one person could be dismissed as sentiment. Kindness from many began to feel like a verdict. He was not sure he deserved it. After everyone left, Eli stood alone in the front window with a piece of cardboard and a black marker. The bakery behind him smelled of flour, cold brick, and a future not yet earned. He wrote slowly. Fresh bread soon. Please be patient. I'm still learning. He taped the sign to the glass. Across the street, near the edge of the square, Mason Reed stood under the shadow of a bare maple tree. The 12-year-old boy wore the same thin navy jacket, gray hoodie, faded jeans, and old sneakers dusted with frost. His light brown hair was messy in the wind. His guarded brown eyes stayed on the sign for a long time. Rune saw him. This time the German shepherd did not rise. He did not cross the room. He did not press the boy into running. Rune only sat beside Eli, quiet as a guardian at the threshold. Eli understood. Some doors had to be opened from the inside. Some children had to decide the warmth was safe. So Eli left the sign in the window, the light on above the counter, and the door unlocked for a few minutes longer than necessary. For 3 days, Eli did not open the envelope. It sat beneath the small lamp, behind the counter, beside the hearth ledger, where the glow made the paper look warmer than it should have. The words on the front seemed to follow him whenever he crossed the room. For the day the soldier stops running. Eli told himself he was too busy. There were repairs to schedule, permit forms to read, invoices to understand, and dough to ruin in new and inventive ways. Jonah came and went with boards, nails, and insults disguised as advice. Gus returned each morning to teach Eli the mysteries of yeast with the solemn patience of a priest explaining creation. Mara kept stopping by with updates from the county, still firm, still watchful, but less sharp than before. And Rune stayed close. The 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 followed Eli from counter to kitchen, from front window to rear storage. Always controlled, always alert. His black and tan coat caught flour dust along the shoulders. His old leather collar creaked softly when he moved. Sometimes, when Eli looked too long at the sealed envelope, Rune would step nearer and place his body between Eli and the nearest exit, not blocking him, reminding him. By the 4th evening, snow began to fall. It came softly at first, silver against the dark windows, settling on the sidewalk and the pines behind the bakery. Maple Hollow quieted under it. The town lights blurred into halos. The old bakery smelled of fresh wood shavings, cold brick, and the faint sweetness of the honey bread Gus had forced Eli to practice 3 times that day. The third loaf had been edible. Barely. Gus had called it an improvement over building material, which Eli decided to accept as praise. Now the bakery was empty. Jonah had gone home. Mara had taken the night shift. Gus had left with half a failed loaf tucked under his arm, claiming chickens were less judgmental than people. Eli stood behind the counter with Rune beside him. The envelope waited. He picked it up. The paper felt thin, almost fragile, but the seal still held. His thumb paused beneath the flap. He had opened doors in worse places, doors wired to explode, doors behind which frightened men waited with rifles, doors that led to rooms he still saw in dreams. But none of them had frightened him like this, because those doors had only threatened his life. This one threatened the story he had told himself about it. Rune sat close and pressed his shoulder against Eli's leg. Eli broke the seal. Insides were several folded pages, written in Mabel Whitcomb's careful hand. A smaller envelope rested behind them, along with a brittle document folded twice. Eli opened the letter first. Dear Elias, if you are reading this, then you stayed long enough to ask questions. That tells me more about your heart than any answer I could have forced upon you. Most men would have sold the building before the dust settled. Some would have searched the walls for money. Some would have walked away the moment they saw the repairs. But you stayed, not because you understood, because something in you needed to. Eli lowered the page. Snow brushed the front window. Rune's breathing was steady beside him. He continued, You may wonder why a woman you do not remember left you a bakery. You may wonder whether this is guilt, charity, or the strange decision of an old woman who lived too long among flour and ghosts. It is none of those. I chose you because I saw you before you became a soldier. I was 8 years old when my parents died. There was no St. Bartholomew's for me, only relatives who meant well in public and sighed heavily in private. I learned early that a child can have a bed and still have no home. I learned that being kept is not the same as being chosen. Eli stopped breathing for a moment. He had never thought of Mabel as a child. In his mind, she had existed only as an old name in legal papers, a woman made of recipes and secrets. But the letter opened another image, a small girl in someone else's house, learning to take up less space. When Whitcomb Hearth finally began to survive, I promised myself that if I could help one forgotten child feel seen, I would. Then another. Then another. Sometimes all I had was bread, sometimes money, sometimes time. Often the greatest gift was silence, the kind that lets a person keep their dignity. Eli's hand tightened around the page. He knew that kind of silence now. He had met it in the letters, in Henry Locke's apple pies, in the way Mabel had helped without turning pain into a performance. Then he reached the paragraph that made the room seem to narrow. The first time I truly saw you, you were 9 years old. Eli's eyes fixed on the line. It was Christmas at St. Bartholomew's. I had brought cinnamon rolls in brown paper sleeves. Most of the children ran to the tables as soon as they smelled sugar. I never blamed them. Hunger is not always in the stomach, but you stood at the back. You were thin, dark-haired, and watching everything like a small soldier before you ever became one. A little boy named Ben began to cry because 2 older children had taken his role. Before any adult noticed, you broke yours in half. You gave him the larger piece and kept the smaller one as if the difference did not matter. But it mattered. You thought no one saw you. I did. Eli closed his eyes. The memory returned not like lightning, but like a door opening slowly in a warm room. Ben's red face, the smell of cinnamon, the paper sticking to his fingers, the sharp embarrassment of doing something kind and hoping no one would make a big deal of it, because kindness was safer when it stayed quiet. Rune moved. Eli opened his eyes. The dog had lowered his nose toward the folded document that had slipped partly from the envelope. With one careful paw, Rune nudged it across the counter until it rested against Eli's hand. Eli unfolded it. It was not a legal document from the will. It was older. Across the top were the words, County Foster Inquiry Form. The ink had faded. Some blanks were filled in with Mabel's handwriting. Applicant, Mabel Eleanor Whitcomb. Child of interest, Elias Voss, age 9. St. Bartholomew's home. Eli stared at it. The room disappeared. For one impossible second, he was a boy again, standing behind the others, never knowing that somewhere, a woman had once written his name on a form that meant she had considered taking him home. The document trembled in his hands. Below the unfinished section, Mabel had written a note in the margin. Harold's condition worsening. Deb's heavy. Application cannot proceed. God forgive me. Find another way to keep him seen. Eli sat down on the stool as if his knees had forgotten their work. Mabel had not simply watched. She had tried. The knowledge entered him gently, and that made it hurt more. He had spent decades building a wall around a single belief. No one came because no one wanted him. Now a dead woman had reached from the past and placed a crack in that wall. Not enough to erase the loneliness. Enough to prove it had never been the whole truth. Rune rested his chin on Eli's thigh. Eli did not push him away. He returned to the letter through blurred eyes. I could not take you home. That failure stayed with me. But I followed your path as best I could without making your life a debt to mine. I heard when you enlisted. I read the small articles when your unit was honored. I sent what I could to veteran funds and rescue programs, always quietly. You became a protector, Elias. But protectors are often the last to admit when they need shelter. I know war took things from you. I do not pretend bread can undo that. A bakery is not a medal, not a reward, and not a chain. If you choose to leave after the 90 days, leave without guilt. But if you stay, promise me only this. Leave this place kinder than you found it. Eli bowed his head. A memory rose, not from childhood this time, but from smoke and sand. Marcus Hale, broad smile gone pale with pain, his hand gripping Eli's sleeve in the last moments of a mission neither of them had fully come home from. Don't let the war be the only thing you bring home. Eli had carried those words like punishment. Now, in Mabel's letter, they sounded almost like a door. The smaller envelope remained. His name was written across it in the same steady hand. He opened it and found a photograph, different from the one in the wooden box. This one showed the same Christmas day at St. Bartholomew's, but closer. 9-year-old Eli stood half-turned toward Ben, both boys holding pieces of the broken cinnamon roll. On the back, Mabel had written, "The world has enough men who know how to win. It will always need more who know how to be gentle." Eli covered his mouth with one hand. He had not cried when he left the orphanage, not when he enlisted, not when he came home from his last deployment and realized the silence of civilian life could be louder than war. He had become very skilled at carrying grief like gear. But now the tears came quietly, no sobbing. No collapse, just water from a stone that had pretended too long it was not cracked. Rune stayed with him. The next morning, Eli opened the bakery for 2 hours. Not officially, not as a grand reopening. The permit still had steps, and the county inspector still needed final paperwork. But Mara had approved a small, supervised community tasting under temporary guidance from Gus, who stood in the kitchen like a general commanding a flour-based campaign. The display case held 6 small loaves. They were uneven. One leaned left. One had a darker crust than planned. None looked like something that belonged in a magazine. But they were warm. The first customer arrived at 10 minutes past 9. Maribel Price was an elderly woman in her early 80s, tall and thin with a graceful stoop, soft brown skin, silver hair pinned beneath a blue knit hat, and hands wrapped around a wooden cane polished by years of use. She wore a pale blue sweater under a wool coat and moved slowly, but her eyes were bright with mischief and memory. She looked at the bread, then at Eli. "I'll take that one." Eli cleared his throat. "I should warn you, it may not be very good." Maribel smiled. "Dear, I am not buying your bread." Eli blinked. She placed $5 on the counter. "I am buying your courage." Gus, behind him, pretended to wipe his eyes with a towel. Jonah, who had appeared for no reason except curiosity, whispered, "Don't get proud. Courage still needs salt." Maribel took the loaf, broke it gently in 2, and walked outside. Through the front window, Eli watched her cross toward the lakeside bench, where Henry Locke sat alone with his coat buttoned to his throat. Maribel handed him half the bread. Henry looked surprised, then laughed. The two of them sat together beneath the bare branches, sharing the uneven loaf like it was something sacred. Eli understood then. Bread was never only bread. It was a reason to open a door, a reason to sit beside someone, a reason not to disappear. That evening, after the tasting ended and the bakery quieted, Eli opened the hearth ledger to the first blank page after Mabel's handwriting. He took her old fountain pen in his hand. His letters were rougher than hers, the ink blotted in one corner. "Maribel Price bought the first loaf when I did not believe it was worth buying. Next week, honey cinnamon bread, no charge." Eli sat back and looked at the words. They were not elegant, they were not enough to repay Mabel, but they were a beginning. Rune placed one paw beneath the counter and lowered his head with a tired sigh. Outside, snow shone in the soft light from the bakery windows. Inside, the old ledger lay open, no longer only a record of what Mabel had done. It had become a place where Eli Voss, soldier, orphan, survivor, and reluctant baker, had written his first promise. Winter settled over Maple Hollow like a white blessing. The pines behind Whitcomb Hearth Bakery stood heavy with snow, their branches bowed but unbroken. Birchwater Lake had frozen beneath a pale morning sun, its surface shining faintly through the trees like a mirror laid down by heaven. Smoke rose from chimneys along Main Street. Footprints crossed the sidewalks, disappeared beneath fresh powder, then appeared again by noon. And every morning before sunrise, a small golden light came on inside the bakery at the edge of the woods. Eli Voss had learned to wake before the town. He moved through the kitchen in his olive green field jacket, plaid shirt, dark blue cargo pants, and worn brown boots, no longer looking like a soldier lost among flour sacks. Not quite a baker yet, but no longer an intruder either. His hands, once trained for weapons and ropes and hard choices made in darkness, now knew the weight of dough. They knew when bread needed more time, when warmth had reached the center, when patience had done what force could not. Rune had his own place now. The 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 lay on a thick mat near the front window, far from the kitchen, where he could see the door, the counter, and the street beyond. His black and tan coat gleamed in the morning light. His old leather collar rested against his neck, the small metal tag engraved Rooney catching the glow from the bakery lamps. He did not wander where food was prepared. He did not beg from customers. He simply watched. And somehow, people trusted him before they trusted their own words. A truck driver stranded by snow sat near Rune one morning and stopped trembling after placing one hand on the dog's shoulder. Henry Locke came in on the anniversary of Eleanor's passing and found a small apple loaf waiting in a brown paper bag. Maribel Price received honey cinnamon bread when her grandson came home from college. Mason Reed found on 2 different mornings a warm roll wrapped in paper near his aunt's porch with no name attached. Eli wrote each act in the hearth ledger. His handwriting was still rough. The ink still blotted sometimes, but the pages no longer frightened him. They steadied him. Mason still had not come inside. The 12-year-old boy lingered near the edges of things, as if the world had taught him to stand where no one could reach him too quickly. He remained thin and wary in his old navy jacket, gray hoodie, faded jeans, and frost-dusted sneakers. His light brown hair was always a little uneven, his brown eyes always watching for the moment kindness might become a trick. But he no longer ran every time Rune looked his way. One afternoon, Eli stepped onto the back porch and found Rune lying in the snow-dusted sunlight, perfectly still. Mason stood 3 steps away, one hand half raised, breathing like a boy approaching a wild creature from a storybook. Rune did not move. Mason took 1 step closer, then another. At last, his small hand touched the top of Rune's head, only for 3 seconds. Then Mason pulled back and hurried away across the square. Eli did not call after him. He only stood in the cold with his heart aching strangely, watching the prints the boy left behind. That was the thing about trust, Eli had learned. It did not march. It crept forward on trembling feet. The next morning, Caleb Maris came to the bakery. He did not belong to the winter scene outside. He was too polished for Maple Hollow's salt-stained sidewalks, too smooth for a building that smelled of flour and wood smoke. He was 45, tall and slim, with black hair combed neatly back and faint silver at the temples. His face was sharp, his smile controlled, and his cold gray eyes seemed to measure everything they touched. He wore a charcoal cashmere overcoat over a dark gray suit, white shirt, navy tie, and polished black leather shoes that had clearly never met a muddy driveway. Caleb introduced himself with a business card. "Crescent Ridge Development," he said. "I believe Deputy Keene has mentioned us." Eli took the card but did not look at it. She used other words. Caleb's smile did not change. "Small towns are protective. It's admirable in moderation." Rune lifted his head from his mat. He did not growl. That almost bothered Eli more. Caleb placed a folder on the counter, careful not to let the edge touch a dusting of flour. "We're prepared to make a final offer," he said. "A generous one." Inside the folder was a check. Eli looked at the number. For a moment, the bakery went quiet around him. It was enough to pay every tax notice, enough to repair the roof, replace the refrigeration, settle permit fees, and still leave Eli with more money than he had expected to see again. Enough to buy land somewhere no one knew his name. Enough to disappear with Rune and never answer another question about Mabel Whitcomb, St. Bartholomew's, or the boy he used to be. Caleb saw the flicker in his face. "You've done something meaningful here," he said softly. "No one can deny that. But meaning does not pay liens, Mr. Voss. Memories do not fix old brickwork. You are carrying an aging building, a sentimental town, and a dead woman's expectations. Imagine what freedom would feel like." The word struck harder than Eli expected. Freedom. For years, he had thought freedom meant no orders, no deployments, no command voice in his ear. Then he came home and learned a man could be free on paper and still live inside a cell built from grief. He looked down at the check, then the little brass bell over the door rang. Jonah Pike entered first, carrying a box of hinges he claimed were not pretty but morally dependable. Behind him came Gus Holloway, cheeks red from the cold, complaining that Eli's last batch of dough had potential, which was what bakers called trouble before it grew up. Naomi Bell followed with a folder tucked beneath her cream shawl. Mara Keene stepped in after them, her deputy jacket dusted with snow and an approved safety report in one gloved hand. Henry Locke took his usual table by the window. Maribel Price bought 2 loaves and told Eli not to look surprised when people paid him for bread on purpose. A gray-haired veteran Eli had seen twice before came in last. He was broad but stooped, with a weathered face, a trimmed white beard, and eyes that kept drifting toward the windows whenever a truck passed outside. He wore an old army cap, a heavy canvas coat, and gloves with worn fingertips. When the distant rumble of a construction vehicle sounded beyond the lake road, the man stiffened. Rune rose, crossed the room, and sat beside him. The veteran placed one hand on Rune's head. His breathing slowed. Caleb watched all of this with polite discomfort, as if the room had filled with evidence he could not price. "You're holding on to an old building," Caleb said. Eli looked around, at Jonah's rough hands, Gus's flour-stained apron, Naomi's calm eyes, Mara's guarded but loyal stance, Henry's quiet table, Maribel's smile, the veteran's hand resting on Rune as if holding on to the edge of a cliff. Then Eli looked at the hearth ledger beside the register. "No," he said. He pushed the folder back across the counter. "I'm holding a promise." For the first time, Caleb's smile thinned. "I hope you understand the consequences. I'm learning consequences don't scare me as much as regrets." Mara's eyes moved to Eli, and something like approval passed across her face. Caleb closed the folder, slipped it beneath his arm, and left without slamming the door. Men like him did not slam doors. They preferred them quietly locked from the outside. But Maple Hollow did not let the bakery stand alone after that. Mara found an old community use clause in county records that slowed Crescent Ridge's legal pressure. Naomi uncovered documents proving Mabel had established a small maintenance fund years earlier. Jonah organized volunteers to repair the back storage wall. Gus recruited 3 retired church ladies to help prepare for a Christmas Eve bread table, while insisting none of them touch the sacred yeast without supervision. By Christmas Eve, Whitcomb Hearth Bakery glowed like a lantern in the snow. A handwritten sign stood on the counter. "If today has been hard, take a loaf. Someone already paid. No names. No questions." Some people took bread. Some left folded bills in a wooden box. Some only came in to sit where it was warm, drink coffee, and remember that loneliness was not the same thing as being alone. Near closing, Rune suddenly stood. His ears lifted. His body went still, not with alarm, but with recognition. He walked to the front door and gave one soft whine. Eli followed. Outside, Mason Reed stood in the snow. His old jacket was too thin, his cheeks were red, his eyes were fixed not on the cookies, not on the loaves, but on the families gathered inside. Eli knew that look. He opened the door. Mason stepped back. "I don't have money." "You don't need money to come in here," Eli said. He wrapped a warm cinnamon roll in brown paper and placed it in the boy's hands. Mason held it like something breakable. Then his gaze shifted past Eli. Near the fence stood a little girl, maybe 7 years old, small and shivering in a pink coat with one missing button. Her blonde hair stuck out from beneath a knitted hat, and her blue eyes were wide with the frightened hunger of a child hoping not to be noticed and wishing someone would notice anyway. Mason looked at the roll. Then he broke it in 2, not evenly. He gave the larger half to the little girl. Eli could not move. For a moment, 3 winters seemed to stand together in the doorway. Mabel watching a lonely boy at St. Bartholomew's, Eli watching Mason in the snow, and Rune standing between them like a guardian sent by a mercy too quiet for human language. Mara came outside and recognized both children. She brought them in gently, called Mason's aunt and the girl's grandmother, and made sure no one was left wandering in the cold. After the bakery emptied, Eli opened the hearth ledger. December 24. Mason needed a warm cinnamon roll. A little girl needed to know she was seen. No charge. He closed the book. Rune rested his muzzle on Eli's hand. Outside, snow fell over the pines. Inside, the fire in the oven glowed low and red. Eli turned off most of the lights, but left one lamp burning in the front window, not for business, for anyone still looking for a door that would open. Sometimes, God does not send miracles with thunder, lightning, or a voice from the sky. Sometimes he sends them quietly, through an old bakery door left unlocked, through a loaf of bread placed in trembling hands, through a loyal dog who knows when a heart is breaking before a person ever says a word. Eli thought he had inherited a forgotten building, but what he truly received was a reminder that no act of kindness is ever wasted. The smallest mercy, given in silence, can travel farther than we will ever know. It can cross years. It can heal wounds. It can find a lonely child, a grieving old man, a tired veteran, or someone sitting quietly in the dark, wondering if anyone still sees them. Maybe there is someone in your life today who needs that kind of small miracle. A phone call, a warm meal, a patient word, a prayer, a hand on the shoulder, a reminder that they are not alone. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and if someone's kindness once changed your life, we would be honored to hear their story. Please like this video, Subscribe to Veteran and Dog and join us for more stories of loyalty, healing, faith, and the quiet miracles God places in ordinary lives. May God bless you, protect your home, comfort your heart, and guide your steps with kindness, courage, and peace. Until we meet again, remember this: somewhere, someone may be waiting for the light you carry.